Hi, Rob.
Hi, Zoubiya.
A pleasure to meet you.
Likewise.
I've had the opportunity to have many chats with you.
Yes.
Got a chance to experience your keynote, really get to grips with the current developments in the Great Teaching Toolkit. I'd like you to first give our leaders, and we're at the Middle East School Leadership Conference, by the way, give the leaders who are listening and the educators listening a sense of your keynote today.
Okay, just a short elevator pitch.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's about leadership, which obviously people are interested in, and the idea that the most important thing leaders do is to build the expertise of their staff, because it's classrooms where learning happens. Schools are about learning. Let's keep the focus on the main thing. And the thing that determines how much learning is really the expertise of teachers in classrooms and what they do. And so school leaders have to maximize that and optimize that. And the strongest lever that they have is to focus on professional development and how they frame that, how they offer it, how much time they give to it, what they do with that time to make it effective, because that's the thing that influences teacher expertise. And it's the gift that keeps on giving. I didn't say this in the talk, but if I learn to be a better teacher gradually over time, every class I teach benefits from that for the rest of my career. It's not like an intervention where you get it while you're doing it and then it fades out, which most do. Mm-hmm. So the argument, the rational argument for saying this should be our top priority, I think is overwhelming. That's at odds with a lot of current practice where, in England, surveys say that an average teacher spends half an hour a week on professional learning out of a 50-hour working week for an average teacher. Mm-hmm. So that's 1%. That does not scream highest priority to me. That screams this. We fit this in around the edges. Mm-hmm. And it should be the other way. I'm not saying they should spend 49 and a half hours of professional learning, but it should be more than that.
How much more?
Well, we talk when we're talking with schools about, for example, using the Great Teaching Toolkit, that if you can't find an hour a week for every member of staff, you're unlikely to get the full benefit.
Okay.
Now, schools will often raise an eyebrow when you say that, because it feels like a lot. An hour a week to dedicate, and we'd talk about, a good model would be to find an hour a week for meeting time, where people get together and collaborate and support each other. And then on the other week, the hour is for individual study, for collecting information and insights about their own classroom, perhaps using student surveys or video or other techniques, looking at other people, giving other colleagues feedback. So there's the kind of out of meeting study and interaction, and then there's the focus time in a meeting where people are together, helping each other. And if you can find an hour a week, that's great. But I don't think that's like an ultimate target. I think that's a kind of minimum requirement. If you can find 2 hours a week, so one of the questions I would have is, how do you find the time and the money to do this? Well, one of the ways you can do it is by teaching bigger classes, because the economics of this is quite simple. If you teach more children in the room, then the unit costs of delivering that go down.
Absolutely.
And therefore you've got money and time to play with. No teacher wants to teach a bigger class. No. But as a parent, one of the questions I would ask is, would you rather have a really excellent teacher with your class in a class of 30, or an okay teacher with your child in a class of 25, or just a kind of mediocre teacher with your child in a class of 20? And I would always have the expert teacher with the class of 30.
It's interesting. You took me back to GCSE year 10 in my own learner experience. And every teacher in the science team used to have Monday lunchtime.
Okay.
So Monday lunchtime was dedicated in year 10 towards revising what was learned. Yeah. And we had this one teacher that everybody knew that he did these kind of power sessions, went through topics with image, and really went into detail.
Worth attending.
There were other teachers who got a turnout of 10, 15 of year 10, and our year 10 was about 500, 600 children. It was a big school. And this particular teacher, who happened to be my form tutor, So at the end of lunchtime, we'd go on a Monday and see the room was so full to the door.
Right.
Because everyone wanted a piece of that 40 minutes.
Yes, exactly.
So that it's interesting that you say that. And it took me to that. So I think there is some...
Well, a great teacher can manage a big group.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's harder. It's more work, for sure. It's more difficult in many ways. It's difficult when you're in a fee-paying school to persuade people that that's what they're paying for.
Or justify.
Justify, yes.
Yeah.
But if we lived in a rational world, which, you know, I know we don't, people would be saying, yes, I'd rather have my child in a big class with a really great teacher than in a small class. So if we could find a way to sell that to teachers, which again I know is a challenge, you could teach, if the choice for a teacher could be that you teach a full timetable over 5 days, let's say if you have a 5-day working week, with classes of 25, or you teach bigger classes of 30, but you only teach 4 days and you have a whole day for professional development. And the costs are quite similar for those sorts of numbers. I mean, you know, you reduce the teaching by a fifth, you increase the numbers by a fifth. It sort of works out, roughly speaking.
Do you know of any school who's piloted
well,
this?
I know some schools who have freed up time for professional learning. They're not always very transparent about how they've done that.
Or the measurable impact of that time.
I know, it's difficult. And I think that's the challenge. That's the barrier, I think. Because, as I say, in a rational world, if you believed that the time you spend on professional learning would pay back in the way that the research says it can do, then it'd be a no-brainer. You'd just say, we want to free up this time. We'd give people a whole day a week to spend on their professional development, and we'd find a way to do that because it's the most important thing. You know, schools are really value-driven places. They're all about purpose. The purpose is to help youngsters, to help them learn stuff, to help them grow, to be adults and take part in society and all of that stuff. And to do that, we need great teachers. So everything that we can do that makes teaching great, we should do that thing. It's really that simple.
I think, though, I can hear the whispers from those potentially watching this thinking, if our board were made aware that we have the capacity to teach bigger groups with the same impact, all that will happen is our timetable will grow.
We'll just be given more,
You'll be given more, and that professional development time would still be utilised for lessons to increase the capacity of the school. And it would be seen as a do you see it? As a lift.
It would be worse than where you were before.
Exactly.
Yes. So obviously I wouldn't advocate that. I think it will depend on the context. In some contexts, school leaders have that power to decide. Certainly many schools in England, that will be the case. Schools here, I think some do, is my sense.
Yes.
Others may be much more constrained, as you say. They are more about kind of delivering, making money perhaps in some cases, or certainly delivering according to a set of expectations. And those expectations are very varied. They come from the parents and the community. They come from inspection processes and other kinds of accountability. And you can't not do those things. You have to. If you don't satisfy your market and you don't satisfy the regulators and you don't deliver on those key outcomes, no one's going to think you're succeeding. And that's quite right. And unless those regulatory systems are really misaligned, then it's not wrong that you should have to tick those boxes. But it is wrong if you think that's all we have to do.
True.
You know, they should be a check. They shouldn't be the be all and end all. And that's not a school. If all a school does is satisfy inspectors and regulators and parents, it's not a school I'd want my children to go to. It's not a school I'd want to work in, because it's just a really impoverished view of what education is about, isn't it?
Yes and no. I agree and disagree in part, and I'm going to explain why. Because, and I haven't really said this on camera before, I have a daughter with additional needs.
Okay.
She wouldn't be able to cope in a classroom. And I was interjecting while you were still making your point that premium schools, one of the things about the atmosphere that they're trying to project to parents is this idea that their child will have a personalized learning journey, and that attention is quite targeted to the child.
Yes.
And it begs for the question, if the class was bigger and the school was bigger, would every child feel seen, heard, and valued enough for the learning to therefore be effected on them?
Yes.
So
that's really, really important.
Yeah.
There are some children, additional needs covers a wide range of things, some of which do need very intensive, very individualized, personal expert. Let's put that out there. Sure. This is not just about having another body to be with them. It's about someone who really, really understands what the challenge is, what they need, how to help them. So there are some children where that is a requirement, and if we are a civilized society, we should fund that. Yeah. But that's an extra. That's not the kind of regular cost of everyday instruction. That's an extra requirement that makes the world fair. It's like putting ramps in so wheelchairs can get up, or making things accessible to everyone. And that's a principle, and I wouldn't waver on that. That we meet where people have different needs, we have to meet those needs. But I don't think it follows from that in order to feel you belong, to feel seen, to be respected, to have an identity with belong to an organization, it doesn't follow that you have to always be in small groups for that. True. In fact, I would say it's pretty much irrelevant, the size of the group. It's about the relationships that you have. It's about the culture. It's about the values. And you can achieve that with big groups, or you can achieve it with small groups. Provided those specialist needs are met, I don't think it follows that. Now, I know parents in general will have a preference to say, well, it's a nice small group, it's nurturing, it's friendly, it's good.
Or
they will want that.
It's the amount of time that it's this division concept that if a teacher has this many minutes and it's divided, the mathematics makes people feel that. That being said, I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying that that's the popular belief.
I know. Yes.
That we would face the challenge we'd face as leaders to try and justify that the impact of this teacher, irrespective of minutes, is different to this model.
I know. And there's a whole debate to have there. And one of the things that drew me into talking about pedagogy in the first place, because I was my research was about assessment mostly, and I was in and evidence and evaluation. That's what I was interested in. Nothing to do with classroom practice. And then I was involved in a thing that became the EEF, the Education Endowment Foundation's Teaching and Learning Toolkit. This was originally a thing for the Sutton Trust. This was in 2010. We started writing this, and it was a summary of what the best evidence available says about different interventions. It's still on the EF are still promoting. It's still widely used. School leaders and everybody else, people in England know about it.
Absolutely.
And you're nodding. I can tell you're familiar. Right. So this was a new thing then, and the reason we did it was because we were coming up to an election in England, 2010, and all three of the main parties were saying we would have some kind of pupil premium. That was a new thing then. It didn't exist before. And we thought that meant extra money for schools, although looking back, that isn't quite how it played out. And so school leaders, Sutton Trust did a survey, and they said to school leaders, how would you spend this extra money? And they said, we would hire more teachers and have smaller classes, and we'd hire more teaching assistants. And those are both really expensive things for a school to do, and they were the kind of top favourites that school leaders said they would spend any extra money on. And we knew that the research evidence about both those things was that they would have a small effect, which was not as big as many other things that they could have spent that money on. So not that there's no effect of having a smaller class, it's just one of the most expensive things you can do, and it's a modest effect. So if you're following the evidence, you probably wouldn't do that, or at least that wouldn't be your first go-to. And we thought, well, why are people saying this thing that's so against the evidence? Well, because they don't know what the evidence says. So let's produce an accessible summary. And that's the piece of work that was led by Steve Higgins, who was my colleague at Durham, and I was part of that original thing. And then it got taken over, and I wasn't involved after that so much, but I was definitely part of the creation of it. And that's why we did it. And then we put this thing out, and it said, class sizes don't matter as much as you think they'll matter. And that was a shocking message. It was well received, I think, the toolkit. And I was often asked to speak about it to audiences of teachers. And I would say this thing, I like to be controversial, upset people when I'm talking, or give them something to think about. Let's put that in a nicer way. So I would say, class sizes don't make as much difference. And teachers would be absolutely sure that I was wrong. And they'd want to argue. That's the prevailing.
Yeah.
That's changed in England now. People don't want to argue about it anymore. But other places they maybe do. And for me, that was incredibly rich discussion, because it basically got down. I would say, well, why do you think you can be more effective in a small class? Why do you think more learning happens in a small class than a big class? And they would say things like, we can give more individual attention. And I would say something like, okay, so imagine you've got a 1 hour lesson and a class of 30 children. If you do nothing other than individual attention, that's 2 minutes per child. And what is each child doing in the other 58 minutes? Is that a great pedagogy? No, it isn't. So at most, you've got 2 minutes of individual attention. And the reality is most children don't get any, and some get a bit, but it's a few seconds out of an hour's lesson. So to be an effective teacher, you have to have strategies that enable you to interact productively with youngsters in a way that isn't one-to-one. Because one-to-one, unless you get down to about 5 or certainly 10, one-to-one is just a really inefficient strategy. So give me an example, I would say, of a strategy that you think can work with a class of 15 that doesn't work with a class of 30.
I think the important word you said there was productive and being efficient with time as well. Both of those are critical to ensure. And my mind went to the spheres of zone of proximal development when you were speaking. And sometimes there's a topic within a sequence where 50% of the children are in the inner circle where they already are able to do the learning efficiently and without assistance. If that's the case, are we then still giving them their 2 minutes? Probably not. No. In practice, not. We're probably going to focus on the children
it's very hard.
Who need the interventions, or the children who have no prerequisite knowledge of that topic to bring them in. So do we really give equal time? No, we give equitable time to children in the classroom. So I think that the argument falls. Well,
and when you describe that, the complexity of managing all the different children with their different starting points, their different needs, their different appetites, their different attitudes, their different all the interactions between them, it just sounds like there's no way anyone could do this. It's just too hard. And yet, go into any school, literally any school in the world, and you will see teachers doing that. Schools that people have said are not good, you will find teachers doing that thing, because every school has those teachers. And when you see the best do it, it's phenomenal. It just makes you well up, and the hairs on the back of your neck go up, and you just think, this is incredible. So how do they do it? I don't know. They're superhuman and they're extraordinary. But they're doing it every day. While we're sat here speaking, there are teachers, less than a mile from us, I'm sure, in schools doing that very thing. And so if you are a teacher and you're kind of puzzled by, well, how can that be? How can I manage this impossible challenge? The answer is, don't ask me, because I'm a researcher. Go and look at another school nearby where somebody's doing it well, and talk to that person and build those networks of support, because your colleagues are doing this, even if you're not, and probably you are too, actually. So maybe all you need is just to be told you're already doing it well, and just keep going. But we can learn from other people, and we should, and that's where the answer is.
Speaking of learning and adult learning, professional learning in education, you touched earlier on the point of professional development. And we talked about a guideline amount of time.
Yeah.
I mean, time is relative, and what we do with our time.
Exactly. Yeah. And also, how do we define professional
and
learning?
the impact of that? My question is the Sims et al. Resource that I know it well through my work with the MPQs, and it's cited in that, and the Sutton Trust is also cited heavily for leaders to know about. But I'm pretty sure most educators or anybody who's not familiar with that work aren't necessarily skilled to evaluate the quality of professional development when they create it.
Yes.
So I'd love for you to give a quick rundown of not necessarily all 17 dimensions, but the gush.
Right. Okay.
Just
the idea of mechanisms.
17 mechanisms. Just a sense of PD is only as impactful as knowing what's in it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great example of what I would describe as evidence-based practitioner advice, because it starts with a systematic review of what do we know about professional development. And there's lots of studies that have tried to evaluate different kinds of professional learning, professional development, CPD. And so we should start by, well, what do they tell us? Mm-hmm. And the answer is that it's quite a mixed picture. But broadly, there is support for the idea that professional development can make a reasonably substantial difference to how effective teachers are. Teachers who engage with the right kinds of professional development become more effective, but become more effective quicker than they would have done if they hadn't. So the overall case is there. And then what they tried to do is not just to report that headline as a statistical average, but to say, well, do we understand some of that variation? And do we understand, crucially, why? So they focused on mechanisms and the idea that if we think about what we're trying to do in professional development is partly seen as learning, partly seen as behaviour change. And those two are not separate, but they come from different traditions in terms of how people have researched. So, for example, in health, there's a lot of research about behaviour change, how you get people to adopt more healthy lifestyles and those kinds of things. We've all tried to do that, I'm sure, and we found it very, very hard to change behaviours.
Changing habits.
Yes, and it's many other examples. I talked to examples about things like learning an instrument. Again, you might have had the experience where you had one teacher and they told you to hold your bow this way or something, and then a new teacher came along and they said, oh, not like that. And it just felt excruciatingly uncomfortable to change something that you'd had that was working. You thought it was fine, but somebody else looks at it and says, no, this is...
back to piano lessons.
Okay, exactly. Yeah. So your hand's position or whatever.
Go this way, not that way.
Okay. The thing about it to hang on to is that the change felt wrong. You felt like you were getting worse, you felt less comfortable, and it took a lot of work to make the new thing the thing you do. And maybe you didn't succeed, I don't know, but eventually if you persist with that, you become comfortable with the new way. And if the advice is right, you become better. Your sound is improved, or your ability to
I think a good analogy for that might actually be learning to drive and then becoming a driver and then learning to be an instructor of those who drive. The instructor level will have different pedals, will have different mechanisms and different tools to enable the driver to be an advanced driver.
Exactly.
Because oftentimes when people hear professional development, they think, am I lesser than the standard? And hence deficit model thinking comes into people that, well, professional development, and this comes back to the point you made in your keynote, that do we only focus on an improvement mindset for those on a PIP? And those on a PLP, schools call it different things. But this idea that you're doing okay because we've got this inspection rating that we're trying to maintain. So let's focus our attention on the crises.
I think that's terrible way to go about it.
But if you've only got so much time, would it not be a slippery slope that you could slide down quite easily as a leader?
to fall into that.
Fall into crisis management.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, well, these are the crises.
So if you're in a crisis management is right. If your building's on fire, you need to put out all the fires. You can't say, oh, I'm prioritizing this one because the other one's going to burn your house down. So if that's genuinely the context, and if you are a leader and that's the school and that's your context, well, I feel for you, and that's a different game. So if you're in a crisis management.
But we would say that if you are consistently crisis managing professional development, that is a trend.
Yes,
that we need to address.
It's not a crisis,
exactly,
or at least it's not a sustainable way to live your life. So if you're consistently in a crisis because you're failing to see what the opportunities are and to think longer term and to prioritize what's important versus what's urgent, then that's a failure of leadership, and that's on you. If you're in a crisis because you don't have any power to do anything other than just to manage a crisis, then my advice would be leave and get another job, because it'll kill you, and it's not a nice place to be, and it's out of your control, and that's not the school leader you want to be. Well, maybe some people do, I don't know. But
the survival instinct keeps you there, but you probably wouldn't be able to, and in the theme of the conference building a sustainable legacy.
Exactly. It's not sustainable. It's toxic, and you need to look around and say, well, do I want this? I mean, I don't know if that's helpful advice, but I do think we sometimes have these narratives around the sort of stress and the crisis and the outside pressures. And yes, of course they're there. I'm not saying they're not. I think they can be. They're certainly very real. They really, really matter. I mean, that's one of the things that strikes me about the context in UAE, particularly that the stakes attached. I mean, head teachers in England talk about high stakes or in relation to off stakes. I think it's worse here.
Yes.
Yeah, really, really matters. And it's more regular as well. The inspection process, for example, there's zero tolerance of even just slight falling away from being the
Do you think that's counterproductive?
Yes, I do. Yeah. I think, I don't know. I think
let's not be so hard-hitting. Perhaps it's impeding or inhibiting the kind of professional development that's truly embedded.
Yes, exactly. I think it's a reason why we're not thinking as much about the longer term, about the really authentic, sustainable solutions that really make a difference to the things that are important. And it's very hard to have that conversation with yourself and to strategically think about what matters here when you've got these drivers all the time kind of beating on your door saying you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. Good leaders are able to manage that. I'm absolutely sure. And they're here in this building today. I've spoken with some of them who make me think that's what they're doing, but they do it by protecting people from that pressure. They don't pass that pressure on.
Internalize
yes, maybe, and that's hard. That is hard for them, but maybe to some extent that is part of the job. Some people do that really well, and I think it's great that they do. I think we all need to have pressure. I'm not saying we should just have a free-for-all and nobody ever looks to see whether it's good or not. We should definitely know what's good. We should have pressure. But it shouldn't be the kind of unrelenting pressure that doesn't give you space.
Or stifle people to actually have a go.
You're afraid to try anything. You're afraid to say invest in professional learning because you think, I've just got to tick these boxes, and unless I do that, my job's under threat and the school's under threat, and all these people's livelihoods, and you go down this spiral of anxiety about that thing. So you haven't got space to just think about, well, what's important? Can we try something different? If you try something different, you're taking a risk, and people need to feel empowered to take a bit of. If you're not taking a risk, you're not really doing the job, are you?
What would you say would be your advice for a leader who is research informed, who understands the dynamics of scaffolding and monitoring and feedback, and really has a strong sense of that in their own practice? They're a good practitioner. They're able to translate that in their own practice. When they go to their team, and they are with a department, and then you've got variable levels of skepticism. You've got some who think, well, that works in the UK schools,
yes,
where they don't have
yes,
EAL students, well, there's this cynicism of contextual relevance of widespread research, and the theorists don't know my challenges.
Yes.
It becomes personal to them.
Of course.
What would be your advice to a leader who has to bring in the best of the research into a context and make it convincing, but also relevant?
Yes. Okay.
What would be your advice?
Well, I think this is a real challenge and a big challenge, and it's very difficult. I think the example you gave earlier of the good driver who becomes a driving instructor, it's a different set of skills. Being a great teacher is not the same as managing a team of people. So there are different skills involved, and that's important, I think, first of all. I think that the knowledge that person has, being research-informed, understanding pedagogy, all of that helps them. It does make a difference because their job is to manage that team, but to manage that team in a specific activity, which is teaching and learning. And so being an expert in that themselves does give them strength. I think it's important. They need to focus on things that really, really matter. I don't think we get... I think it's rarely the case that one teacher should tell another teacher how to do something, because in my experience, when that's happened to me, if someone else has said, "Oh, you should do this," I've always just thought, "Well, that's your advice, that's your opinion, that works for you." Sometimes it's helpful, quite often it isn't. So, but I do think that teachers should understand. I talked about the need to understand the theory. So if the research-informed teacher knows about the science of learning and what learning is and how it happens, they'll know about how things go into short-term memory, but they really don't stay for very long, and we can't process very much.
Sure, working memory,
yeah. But some of that ends up then getting transferred into long-term memory, which is obviously much bigger and much longer lasting. So that's the aim. How do we do that? By processing. And so that's how do we get students to do that? Model is helpful if it helps us to think about process, and it leads us to do things like retrieval, practice, spacing, so that we give time to forget and so on. And if you didn't know that theory, some teachers just instinctively think, well, that's what, we did this last week, we need to just check if it's there. But most don't. When I was a teacher, I certainly didn't. I would teach a topic, students could do it. I'd think, great, they've got this. We'd come back literally the next day and they couldn't do it. And I would just be hitting my head again, frustrated, thinking, how can this be? You could do this yesterday. Why can't you do it today? I was annoyed with them, if I'm honest. And I now think, well, what an idiot.
Did you see it as a reflection of your own aptitude or your abilities?
Up to a point, I suppose. But no, I thought it was just them being perverse, which is just ridiculous because it happens again and again and again. And after a while,
What's
you might
the common denominator?
Yeah, you might think, okay, whether whoever's fault this is, you can't just be in denial about it. You need to address it and think about why it is and what you can do. And maybe to some extent I did, but I don't think I really did properly. I just thought I didn't understand why, I think, and therefore it just seemed a bit bizarre. And I think if I'd known a bit more about memory and how it works, I might have been better able to respond to that. So that bit of theory would have helped me in adapting.
You had some aha moments following that.
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of thinking about, oh, okay, I wasn't that great, was I?
Yeah.
Looking back, very much so. Yeah. So
you mentioned a point earlier as well. Sorry.
Yeah. No. Go.
Cutting in there because it was exactly on this point that most leaders, teachers, educators think they are better than they are.
Oh, right.
So that's one idea that I want you to hold, and then I want you to hold the other idea that often the teachers who are the most self-critical.
Yeah.
And I've found this in my coaching.
Yeah.
They are the ones who are hardest on themselves, but at the cost of their well-being.
Yes.
And those who think they're great are the ones who don't have the anxiety of the improvement mindset.
Yeah.
How would you manage both characters?
Yeah, well, okay, so these are classic management challenges, aren't they, about dealing with human beings and all the variety. And you're right, you have some people who are more confident than they should be, and some people who are less confident than they should be. Obviously, there are some gender relationships there as well that tend to be correlated with that, or different other kinds of characteristics.
And cultural.
And cultural, yes, exactly. And we should be aware of those, but not limit people by those characteristics, but take each one as they are. I think that the efficacy is important. So the belief that you have agency here, that you have control, that you can make a difference. So it's all about trying to help people not to think about what matters is how good I am today, but what matters is what direction am I traveling in, and what am I the owner of that journey, or am I just being buffeted a feather in the wind? Do you mean
like aspirationally?
Yes, aspirationally, for sure. So if you ask teachers, how important is it to you to be better at your job, you'll get a range of answers.
It sounds like a coaching conversation.
Yes, exactly. Some people will say, it's everything to me. I want to be the best I can be. I know that's hard. I know I have to work at it. And I know that some of, like any other kind of learning, that can be bruising, where I find that I'm not doing as well as I thought I was, but I'm up for that. That's my challenge. Other teachers will say, look, this is a tough job. I work 50 hours a week. I do everything for my children. The last thing I need is you telling me that I should be better than I am. I'm good enough. Thank you. I might not quite put it in those words.
Actually, the crux of what I was getting to, because you've got someone who's maybe got a father, elderly father who's got cancer.
Exactly.
They've got so many things on their plate, and we almost feel the guilt of saying, well, you're great, but it would be even better if, and we bear the weight of that.
And what they hear is you're not good enough.
Yes.
So you say you're great, but, and then you've lost the you're great. Because
I think it could be you're great and how about we look at
it? It's really, really hard to get that message. The only way to do it is to model it, to live it. So school leaders have to say, I'm really proud of our school and what we do, but here are some things that we can be even better at.
Or speak about themselves. I'm really great at this.
To share.
But I'm not great at this.
Exactly. Yeah. And to share, if they're classroom practitioners as well, which many school leaders are, of course, to talk about that in terms of their practice. So I did this survey with my students to find out what they thought. There were some things they liked and said were good. There were some things that I wasn't so keen to hear, that they didn't like as much. These are things I can work on. So to share that openly, when leaders do that, is really powerful, because it gives everyone the license to say, well, okay, so we don't have to be perfect. It's all right to admit that there are things we're working on. That culture changes when leaders do that themselves. So, if you think an improvement mindset is important, it has to be for you as well as a leader, not just, try and get everyone else to do it.
Get the troops to improve.
Exactly.
Just get them to improve.
Live that yourself and model it, and then you'll start to get some buy-in. And not everyone, for sure, but work with the people who are, good to work with, who are keen to interact, who are keen to learn, because the more you do that, that's a kind of richer place to start, I think. There will be some who are keen. You work with them, they start to have a fabulous experience, to be demonstrably improving, and then everyone else will want to have part of that. You don't have to force it on them, I think. The efficacy feelings do matter, the belief that you can do things, that you can get better. How do we boost that for people who don't have good self-esteem? It's very, very hard.
It's hard.
But, we're doing that in classrooms for young people every day. We have classrooms full of kids who don't have high self-esteem. I think
that's that effortful approach, where we know this isn't easy, but it's necessary. Because in order to have high-impact learning, meaningful learning happen at all levels, we need to apply ourselves in what matters, which is learning in the classroom. So I think that shift, it's a paradigm shift for some, where it's very organized, org chart, I'm reigning over these teams, and it has to be more of a cyclical relationship. Just lastly, and I know we've been speaking probably longer than we intended.
That's
thank
fine
you
by
so
me.
much. It's
really
happy
interesting
conversation.
You're going to have to edit down.
I don't. I probably not, because everything we've spoken about might make up multiple clips. But just lastly, You mentioned the point about your evidence reviews
Yes.
and your toolkit being available in multiple languages.
Yeah.
And that's something, despite me being very au fait with that, I hadn't seen it available in different languages. So I'd love for you to just take the opportunity to tell everyone.
So we wrote the review. I mean, you mentioned the Sutton Trust, but what makes great teaching was again the thing that followed on from the teaching and learning toolkit that became EF thing. And from that, then 5 years, that was 2014. Then in 2019, we thought, okay, we should update this thing. And that's what the Great Teaching Toolkit Evidence Review was, really. It was an update. And we published that. And it changed a little bit. I think the focus is more kind of practical application, usable thing for practitioners, whereas the first one was a bit more theoretical. Anyway, we published this thing and people just came to us and said, this is really powerful, it's really useful, but we're working in, I think the first one was China, and we want to have a Chinese translation. Are you interested? And we said, yes, we're absolutely interested. And translation is a challenging thing.
It's a tricky game because it has to be localized.
Yes, the context has to work, but also the kind of technical education language and the research language. So you can't, not everyone can do it. You have to be a fluent speaker of the language, but also understand the education context and understand the research. And that's quite if you think about those Venn diagrams, it's not, there aren't many people who can do that.
There's a really narrow sweet spot in the middle of that.
Yeah. So we were lucky to find people who wanted to do that, and they've done it. And, it's been through various different kinds of quality assurance. So the Chinese one to begin with, I think Arabic may have been the second. Welsh came quite early because we were working with a lot of schools in Wales, and then the others have followed, literally just because a group of schools have said, we'd like this, and we're happy to lead on that translation process, and we've said, fantastic, fill your boots.
Brilliant.
So there'll be more as well. We've got all those languages. I think Swedish was the last one we've got. We've got Spanish, Brazilian, Portuguese, Arabic, Chinese, Welsh, and there's maybe one other. Anyway, that's the
But importantly, for the language, the schools that have a language focus, for example, we've got Italian and French schools and so forth. The toolkit is available for them to convert into their schools in a linguistically appropriate and pedagogically appropriate way.
We hope so, yes. And if it isn't available in your language currently, come and talk to us, because we'd love it to be, and it's great that more and more people use it. It's available on all those different language versions are available on the website for free. Anyone can just download it and read. Obviously, the other tools that support people in using it are not free. There's a lot more value in that. But it's a real principle of everything we do that we want as many people as possible to benefit from it. So where we possibly can, we make things available for free.
On that note, thank you so much. We've had a really in-depth, insightful, challenging as well conversation about contemporary issues in the Middle East leadership and how we can overcome those challenges. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been great. Really enjoyed it.